Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Charles Addams, A Cartoonist's Life by Linda H. Davis. Narrated by Steve Menasche. Cartooning is the ideal work for the uncommitted. Ed Koren. Chapter 1. Arrested at the age of 8. They said that Charles Addams slept in a coffin and drank martinis with eyeballs in them. They said he kept a guillotine at his house and received chopped-off fingers in the mail from fans. It was once reported that he had been given a monogrammed straitjacket as a birthday gift, a garment that might have come in handy if the other stories were true, such as the one Patricia McLaughlin told about Addams moving around the living room at a party, methodically and imponderably depositing dollops of tooth powder in various corners. A charm to ward off cavity-causing vampires, she wondered. People said that Addams had married Morticia, the pale dagger in the spidery black dress from the Addams Family, that familiar band of subversives that included Gomez, Lurch, Pugsley, Wednesday, Uncle Fester, Grandma, Thing, and Cousin It. The story most often heard concerned a Charles Addams cartoon about a ghoul in a maternity room come to claim his offspring. "Don't bother to wrap it, I'll eat it here," he tells the nurse. They said that Addams would have periodic mental breakdowns and begin drawing the gruesome maternity room cartoon. Or he'd redraw The Skier, his classic 1940 cartoon showing single ski tracks on either side of a tree, as though the skier seen vanishing down the hill had passed right through it. As Addams would begin madly sketching the skier, or the maternity ghoul, depending on which version of the story you heard, his New Yorker employer had him carted off in an ambulance to the loony bin. Everyone from Dick Cavett to medical illustrator Shirley Batty had heard the stories. George Plimpton had heard them while he was still a student at Harvard during the 1940s. Wilfred Sheed was told about them during his school years at Oxford. And the Addams legend caught up with New Yorker staff members and contributors all over the world. What people wanted to know was Charles Addams really like. Even in places where people had never heard of the New Yorker, said Calvin Trillin, eventually they'd get around to asking about Addams. James Garrity, Addams' former art editor at the New Yorker, had been asked the question wherever he went. In Avignon, I was asked, the French, for what is Charles Addams really like? He had been asked the same question in Italian, in Bergamo, and in Greek, in the island of Rhodes. And he truly believed that if he had ever visited Timbuktu, he'd have been asked the question in Timbuktuese, what is Charles Addams really like? "Are people ever disappointed when they meet you?" a reporter once asked Addams. "I suppose they are. Aren't you?" he deadpanned. Everyone, from Cary Grant to the clerk at the Registry of Motor Vehicles, had wanted to meet Addams. He had long ago opened his front door to find a fat little man standing there. "I've come to see you in your natural bailiwick," drawled Alfred Hitchcock. Many years before 1981, when the latest intrepid reporter went in search of answers, the name Chaz Addams, as the artist abbreviated it in thick black ink in a lower corner of his cartoons. "Just a matter of design," he explained. "It looks better than writing out Charles," had become synonymous with black humor. He could make even a chair scary grim, said New Yorker artist Misha Richter. Though much of Addams' work was funny without being dark, and marked by great sweetness, It was the sinister stuff that made him famous and earned him such sobriquets as the Van Gogh of the ghouls, the Bela Lugosi of the cartoonists, the graveyard guru, and a purveyor of American Gothic. His work was compared to that of Shakespeare and Poe. The Addams name was intertwined with a certain kind of offbeat character and place. One saw a particular type of woman, model thin, with pale skin and long black hair, wearing a black dress, and thought, Morticia. Round, bald men brought Uncle Fester to mind. The Addams name also conjured an atmosphere and a house, appealing Victorian confection that had come to represent something menacing. Well, it looked a bit like a Charles Addams cartoon. Lady Bird Johnson said in 1964, after seeing the property in Johnson City, Texas, that would become the presidential ranch. And I think that if I'd been told that I was going to buy it and start trying to make it into a home, I would have turned and run, she added. It was no coincidence that the notorious Hitchcock movie Psycho, released in 1960, had an Addams-esque Victorian as the home of the psychopath Norman Bates. Hitchcock had become an Addams friend and owned 2 of his original cartoons. Sometimes the Addams delinquents assumed non-human form. There was the famous hairball named Cousin It in the television series. There was the grinning, snaggle-toothed, grinchy figure who had appeared in The New Yorker in 1974, tearing down a wintry mountain slope on a snowmobile, the razor-like hair on his body flying straight back, the abominable snowman as winter sportsman. But often Addams' creepiest people were the normal-looking, nondescript types, the people one passes on the street without truly seeing them. The little clerk, the drab housewife, the purposeful chore lady, as Addams called her, who in a memorable 1942 cartoon raises the leg of her bound and gagged employer and continues her mechanical sweeping. People swore that they had actually seen the maternity room cartoon, but Addams had never drawn it. He had, however, submitted a cartoon rough, an artist's draft, with a similar idea. "I'm worried about Albert," says a wife of her husband in a maternity room. "He eats his young." Of course, it was rejected, Addams told his friend Stephen M.L. Aronson, a book editor and writer. Still, people believed what they wanted to believe. A 1978 New Yorker Thanksgiving cover by Addams, showing a stunned turkey farmer contemplating the flock that has gathered into military formations in the yard, provoked some wild reactions by readers who interpreted the straightforward drawing as a reference to Nazi concentration camps. And yet, Addams himself had invited the misperception, if only in jest. Hadn't he once answered his fan mail on a letterhead inscribed, "The Gotham Rest Home for Mental Defectives"? Hadn't he worn flaming red pajamas over his clothes to one Manhattan party, and a Knights Templar robe to another? Dressed as Abe Lincoln for an awards ceremony, which wasn't a costume party. Taken to pedaling a tricycle while smoking a cigar around another party. He had long delighted in telling reporters about some of the gifts he had received: a gilded skull, a human thigh bone, a frozen beef heart in a box for Valentine's Day. "I woke up the other night and felt like screaming," he once told a reporter. "I thought, why not? No one will ever hear me. So I let out a long, thin scream and felt much better." He visited snake farms. He was known to picnic in graveyards, and he sometimes took souvenirs. Friends of the cartoonist noted that it was always at Charlie's instigation
Sample complete. Ready to continue?